Very few places in America have such amazing sites for exploring volcanic history as the Pacific Northwest. Dormant, extinct, or active volcanoes hold spectacular views. Before these volcanoes rose, a foundation of basalt was laid across vast areas of Oregon and Washington, named the Columbia River Basalt. Up to 15,000 feet thick. These layers are best seen in eastern Oregon, where they have been cut by extensive erosion. Below and above the basalts are amazing layers of ash, sediment, and fossils. This area was so spectacular, the government declared it a national monument, which we know now as the John Day Fossil Beds. Secular scientists say the thousands of feet of basalt and ash layers, along with the erosion which carved them out, took many millions of years to form. As we look at the evidence, another explanation is possible, that they were laid down and carved quickly as the result of a global flood. Which view is right? What really happened here? All this and more next on Awesome Science. Awesome Science takes you on a field trip to some of the most amazing geologic and historical sites around the world, where we use the Bible as our history guidebook to interpret what we see, that the Bible can be trusted, and empirical science falls in line with the biblical account of creation, the fall, and the flood. Science, it's awesome. The state of Oregon is divided into 4 major areas: the pristine coastline, rich valleys, Cascade Mountains, and the high desert to the east. Much of this high desert is covered in basalt thousands of feet thick. The basalt comes from a series of lava flows originating from numerous fissures in southeastern Washington and northeastern Oregon. Some of these lava flows traveled as far as the Pacific Ocean, a few hundred miles to the west. Some of the basalt has been removed, creating large open areas thousands of feet deep, revealing the underlying layers of sandstone, shales, and volcanic deposits. These sedimentary beds have colorful shades of tan, green, and red. They often contain fossils, mostly of plants, but a few animals as well. Some of the most spectacular sites where this sediment was exposed were set aside for the national monument. Spread over 3 different locations, over 100,000 visitors come every year to experience the outstanding geology and scenery. This part of Oregon was named after John Day, a hunter and trapper who came west on an expedition party in 1812. He and a partner became separated from their group and were raided by Indians. This happened where the John Day River enters the Columbia. The river, which meanders through eastern Oregon, and the region were named after him. The monument was established in 1975 and encompasses around 14,000 acres. It's easy to make your way around the monument on the highways and gravel roads. If you're traveling through this area, it's really worth a visit. As you drive through the large canyons and valleys, it becomes evident that more than one geologic formation can be seen in these steep walls. From the top of the canyon all the way to the bottom, there are 10 formations. The top formation consists of sediments and glacial deposits, and the bottom of the canyon contains marble, schists, and limestone. All of the formations fit into the geologic column. Sections of the Holocene, Pleistocene, Pliocene, Miocene, Eocene, Cretaceous, Jurassic, Triassic, and Permian. By the way, creationists and evolutionists both agree that these rock layers are real and have distinctions. Where we disagree is the timing of the laying down of these layers. Secular geologists use this column to describe the long ages of the evolutionary history of the Earth. Each layer has a set of index fossils that are used to identify it. For the most part, biblical creationists also use the same column, but they interpret what they see mainly as layers being laid down during the flood in a quick succession, not over long ages. Arguably, there is no one location on Earth that has the full column stacked one layer on top of the other. Scientists piece it together by comparing multiple locations around the world. There is some debate among creationists over whether the Columbia River Basalt were formed during or after the flood. There is strong evidence that heavy volcanic activity was happening during and after the flood, when the floodwater was moving into the ocean basins as the Earth came to a balance point. One reason why the scientists think that the basalt may have formed after the floodwaters moved off the continents is that when magma comes to the surface at the bottom of the ocean, it has a tendency to form pillows. Yet, most of the basalt here has not formed into pillows. But more recent observations have been made in Hawaii, where large amounts of magma have quickly developed underwater without pillowing. So, we can't be absolutely certain, but we still have a fairly narrow window, much less than the millions of years in the evolutionary view. The pillowing features seem to be related to the quantity and quickness at which the magma exits to the surface. With the massive quantity of basalt here, we can be fairly certain that the Earth was putting out very large amounts of magma at the end stages of the flood. The other challenge with this lava being post-flood is the fact of the massive amounts of erosion that occurred. The flood is the only logical event with the means of carving this basalt thousands of feet deep. There is evidence that we can interpret as several large lakes that existed in the west after the flood. These lakes eventually breached, and the escaping water carved the landscape as it made its way to the ocean. Glacial Lake Missoula and Lake Bonneville are just two examples. Yet, there just isn't enough evidence that can be interpreted as a local flood event in Oregon. As you enter the John Day River Valley, near the small village of Antelope, it's easy to see the lines of contact between lava beds. They're straight and level. This evidence is consistent with the short period of time between one flow and the next, and the whole sequence accumulated very quickly. There was not hundreds of thousands of years between flows, otherwise we'd see erosion. There is also a large amount of sliding and slumping in the layers, so the John Day beds were not thoroughly consolidated when formed, but were still soft or plastic when the bending action happened. Then they hardened. Many locations around the world have had extensive volcanic activity in the past. This includes huge magma deposits and massive layers of ash, such as in the southwest at Petrified Forest National Park. During the flood, massive tectonic activity was happening below the waters to release this magma and ash. When the highway was built along the John Day River, several hillsides were exposed, showing conglomerate layers. Below the conglomerate layer are sandstones, shales, and ash deposits. All of these layers are sedimentary, meaning they were deposited in water. Shales are usually formed by sand, pressure, and heat. The heat fuses the particles of sand and other materials together into a shale. There was plenty of heat present below the surface of the floodwaters to help form the shales, along with the volcanic activity to generate the ash layers. The Bible tells us that God sent the flood to destroy all land-dwelling, air-breathing life, except for Noah, his family, and the animals on the ark. None of these types of animals or people could have survived what was happening as the floodwaters covered the entire earth. God's destruction was complete, just as he said it would be. This is exactly what we see from the geologic record. The destruction was massive and worldwide. Thousands of cubic miles of material have been removed from this area. Where did it go? There's no significant accumulation of sediment anywhere in between here and the Pacific Ocean. For hundreds of miles up and down this valley, the excavation of the Columbia River Basalt and other layers has been enormous. Water erosion has amazing properties and can cut through just about any substance. In 1982, at Mount St. Helens, a mudflow caused by immense amounts of water came out of the crater and carved canyons hundreds of feet thick, including a lava flow thought to be 500 years old. After day 150 of the flood, the Bible tells us that the waters were indeed receding. Below the surface, the remaining movements of the continents and changes of elevation were happening. Mountains were being pushed up, valleys were being formed, and what is now the Pacific Ocean was sinking lower. These massive volcanic changes started moving the water off the continents and into the ocean basins. During this time, giant sheet erosion was moving sediments off the top layers and dumping them on the continental shelves in the ocean. As the water decreased, it began to carve canyons and gaps in the mountain chains and plateaus. It is believed that this massive erosional event was responsible for carving the John Day fossil beds. The absence of significant accumulations of erosional debris and sedimentary deposits between here and the ocean suggests that most of the material eroded from these great canyons was dumped into the Pacific Ocean. The Genesis flood could provide sufficient water to accomplish this task quickly. We're here behind Fossil High School, where collecting is permitted. Be sure to have a hammer and a geology chisel. Let's go. This rock is white volcanic ash. This is the area that we can dig in. Let's go look for some. Oh, wow. What's interesting about these leaves is the edges aren't bent, which means that they were stripped off their plant and buried in the mud flow within seconds. This find is significant because it shows catastrophe was involved in making this fossil. If this leaf had fallen from a tree and lied on the ground for a while, it would have first withered and the edges would have been bent. Then it would have eventually decomposed. This leaf didn't even get a chance to wither before it was buried. Oh! Here's another one. Oh! Here's another one. At the beginning stages of the flood, the fountains of the Great Deep were unleashed and it rained for 40 days and nights. Water quickly flooded the earth, wiping out the vegetation quickly, stripping leaves from trees as the waters came. The fountains of the Great Deep also included volcanic activity, which would have spewed ash into the water and dropped quickly as sediments, burying the leaves and other small animals. It is quickly evident why this is called fossil beds, because the fossils are everywhere. What makes it even more remarkable is that these leaf impressions were made by vegetation which existed before the flood. It is a reminder that God's judgment was swift and sure. Everything died in that catastrophe except for those on the ark. These are the Palisades. They're composed of conglomerates with angular rocks and boulders. The Palisades are 18 miles west of Fossil High School and a part of the Clarino unit of the John Day fossil beds. They are thought by secular scientists to have formed 44 million years ago in a series of volcanic mudflows called lahars. We've seen lahars happen, and we have evidence of past lahars, most recently when Mount St. Helens erupted. Secular scientists claim that this area was vastly different at one time, that this high desert used to get 100 inches of rain every year and was surrounded by volcanoes in a near-tropical jungle rainforest. They say that this area was a near-tropical rainforest because most of the fossil leaves in the rocks came from a rainforest environment. Modern leaves that are similar are found in Central and South America, Southeast Asia, and Africa. These include palm trees and avocado. But strong bedding could indicate that some of the layers may have been sorted by water or dropped from the air into the water. There's no question about these cliffs being formed with water. Secular scientists say it was made during a volcanic mudflow, but there is more evidence to support that it was made during the flood. After day 150 of the flood, the waters began to recede. As the Rockies were coming up, The Earth's crust near Idaho, Oregon, and Washington developed deep cracks, opening up fissures for large amounts of magma to come to the surface, thus allowing for the Columbia River basalts to form. Ash from these eruptions would have generated the airfall particles which dropped into this formation. Leftover vegetation from the beginning of the flood would have mixed in with the ash and created these layers. Concerning the fossils found in the layers, we can infer from the Bible that the Earth was much more temperate and tropical before the flood. The fossils we find here reflect and confirm this, as long as these plants are from the same place and not transported. After all, these fossils are a record of burial, and that does not always mean that they were living together. There are few or no places on Earth today where such diverse plants grow together, yet it is plausible before the flood. The Arch Trail works its way up to and along the tall cliffs. Fossils are abundant here. There are even some petrified logs in the deposits, some horizontal, and some are even vertical. The horizontal logs all point in the same basic direction. The petrified logs can be explained by mud flow, but they can also be explained by a large-scale flood. We know from places like Mount St. Helens how logs can end up vertical in a formation when the root ball soaks up with water and drops to the bottom. They are then covered by sediment and fossilized. Based on lab experiments, petrified logs can be formed quickly. It doesn't take millions of years. Another indicator that these cliffs are young is the lack of extensive erosion on the cliffs. Erosion can be caused by rain and wind, but also the freezing and thawing seen here every season. The current rate of erosion can be determined based on observations. There are large boulders on the ground, but nothing significant to suggest millions of years. The cliffs could not have remained so steep if long ages had passed. We also know that this area regularly experiences small earthquakes, which would also shake loose rocks from the rock face. Over long ages, this cliff would have been shaken apart and eroded long ago. Furthermore, using all of these principles of erosion, based on the current rates and conditions, this area is about 1,600 feet above sea level and would have been eroded down to sea level in 12 to 15 million years. So, even using the secular timescale, these cliffs could not be 44 million years old.
Here we are in the Palisades, and what do you know? We think we found some fossils.
In addition to plant fossils, animal fossils are also found here. These include teeny four-toed horses, huge rhino-like brontosaurs, crocodilians, and meat-eating creodonts. In other places around the monument, they have also found saber-toothed tiger fossils. These animals don't live here today, and most of them lived in a tropical environment, just like the plant fossils we also find here. What we find here is just a remnant of what lived here before the flood. Another piece of evidence, or lack of evidence, that this area was not an ancient forest is the absence of a thick layer of leaves, humus, and debris on the forest floor before the mud flow came. If a jungle-like environment was here, there should be thick layers of fossilized forest. Yet, the only evidence used to support the presence of an ancient forest is the fossilized flora in the rocks. There is no evidence that these fossil plants actually grew here. What we do know is that water was involved in bringing them here. A much better model is that they were carried in during the flood, deposited, and then fossilized. The catastrophic flood described in the Bible gives us a much better explanation of what we see here at the Palisades. One of the most photographed sites in the John Day fossil beds is the Painted Hills, close to Mitchell. Its rolling gold and rusty-colored hills are strikingly beautiful. In the Painted Hills, we find leaf impressions of pine, alder, oak, and rose. Secular paleontologists suggest that thick forests grew here, mainly of hardwoods. They also say that rainfall was approximately 40 inches a year. The best modern example of this environment and weather is seen in mainland China. To explain the formation of the Painted Hills using secular ideas, 3 different lakes and floodplain environments are used, with drying and time gaps between over some 40 million years past. This time is needed to allow for the development of flora, one above the other, and sufficient time for erosion and the destruction of the previous environment. Yet, there are some major challenges with this idea, because the evidence of long ages is not readily apparent. If a forest grew here, we should see tree limbs and maybe small root balls, but none of that is found. We should even find some coal from the decaying trees, but none of it is there. There are some black smears in the beds, but they are permineralized wood and not significant compared to what we should expect from an ancient forest growing here. We also know that it only rains an average of 14 inches a year in this region. But the fossil vegetation here grows in a much more lush environment. These type of fossils are what we would expect to find from a pre-flood environment. We find animal fossils of insects, salamanders, small fish, bats, and even bird feathers. If a local flood buried these animals and they were fossilized, you would expect to find insects, fish, and salamanders because they could not escape easily. On the other hand, flying creatures could have escaped, yet their fossils are also here. A large global-scale flood event makes more sense of the variety of fossils we see here today. In addition, the fossilized leaves found here are mostly flat, indicating they submerged in water and were buried quickly before their leaves curled. If several forests lived and died here, then the leaves should have round edges or just decayed away. Because these leaves are buried in sediments and ash, where did the water come from? The closest source is Bridge Creek, which is just a small stream and doesn't provide nearly the amount of water needed to create large amounts of sediment to fossilize a forest. For this amount of destruction seen here at the Painted Hills, it would have required a major catastrophe. A better explanation is that these leaves were transported in. This fits with a global flood. The leaves would have been separated from their trunks and limbs in the incoming floodwaters, and then buried rapidly into quickly forming sediments and volcanic ash. The animals too would have been swept up in the waters along with the leaves and fossilized quickly. The evidence here at the Painted Hills is much more consistently explained by flood model researchers. Along Highway 207 near Wheeler is a fascinating geologic formation in the John Day fossil beds. Behind me is the Cretaceous Gable Creek conglomerate, dated around 30 million years old by secular scientists. The problem for secular scientists is that there's about 30 million years missing in between the Eocene Clarinal formation and this one. Maybe this wasn't formed over millions of years, but by the flood over a little period of time. Just around the bend in the road, the Gable Creek conglomerate opens up to reveal startling evidence that it was created with catastrophic processes. Here we have the Hudspeth marine sandstone intermixing with the Gable Creek conglomerates. That's not such a big problem until you see the direction of flow indicators. One came from the southeast, the other from the northeast. The Hudspeth sandstone contains marine fossils, while the Gable Creek conglomerate contains a variety of rock types, including quartzite and granite. These layers cover 70 square miles and are 9,000 feet thick in some places. Since quartzite mountains don't occur in Oregon, these rocks would have needed to have been rolled here from someplace else. The nearest source for these quartzite cobbles is the Rocky Mountains of Idaho and Montana, several hundred miles away. Based on studies by creation scientists, only currents over 50 miles per hour and slurries of over 100 feet deep could have moved these rocks. Secular geologists cannot easily explain these geologic features. Since the Hudspeth Formation is sandstone and contains marine fossils, This means that these rocks were formed underwater in a large flood event.
All this is better explained by a global flood with violent shifting currents under the floodwaters.
The Bible tells us that those floodwaters covered the entire earth. There were violent currents flowing around the globe as huge shifting in the earth's plates was happening below the waters.
Massive new sedimentary layers were being made. The destruction was global.
Another spectacular site is Picture Gorge, near the monument headquarters. This steep canyon boasts of showing at least 17 distinct lava flows from the Picture Gorge Basalt, which is part of the Columbia River Basalt.
The Picture Gorge Basalt covers over 10,000 square miles and makes up 2% of the Columbia River Basalt.
These flows most likely came from fissures or cracks in the Earth's crust, which can be observed down the road from Picture Gorge by fossil.
Secular scientists will often tell you that the small John Day River carved this canyon over long ages. Yet, with some closer examination of the evidence, this may not be the case.
Just the fact that the gorge has near vertical walls is an indication these steep walls are not so old. If the gorge had existed for millions of years, the current rate of erosion would have rounded or even removed much of the material forming this canyon. Water usually finds the lowest point to travel through. After a careful analysis of the geology and landscape, the John Day River should have flowed past this area and through Keys Creek Pass, just to the west, which is about 1,000 feet lower. But it went through this area we now call Picture Gorge.
In geomorphology, we call this a water gap. Many water gaps can be seen around the world where water has cut through elevated areas.
The most famous is the Grand Canyon in Arizona. Long ages can't explain this geologic feature. Some secular scientists say that the land was pushed up after the gap was made. It's pretty easy to see this is not the case.
If the ground were pushed up, then you'd see broken and cracked layers, which we don't see. If the ground rose too quickly, it would dam up and go the other way.
Water gaps are a good indication that there was a global flood.
Based on observations, the astute researcher recognizes that this canyon was formed by catastrophic processes. But sadly, many reject this truth in favor of a secular worldview interpretation.
The flood provides the perfect conditions to carve a canyon like we see at Picture Gorge. As you come out of Picture Gorge, Sheep Rock towers in the middle of the valley. It's an impressive sight because all of the layering seen in this mound are several hundred feet high.
The bottom layers are the John Day Formation, mostly made up of ash. The different colors represent the different stages of its formation. The lower is red, the middle is greenish, and the upper is a buff color.
Secular scientists say the John Day Formation was made 18 to 39 million years ago. But because of the disjointed nature of the mammal skeletons and the localized nature and varying thickness of these beds, slumping and repositioning of these sediments has likely occurred underwater. Put simply, the floodwaters were very active and violent while this layer was being deposited.
What's cool about Sheep Rock is the cap on the top. After all that ash layering, the top is basalt from the Picture Gorge basalts. Sheep Rock used to be connected to the other formations here in the valley, but the receding floodwaters carved around it and left it standing alone.
After the massive lava flows covered the John Day Formation, sediments of ash were laid down during the late stages of the flood in the Pliocene-Miocene-Mascal Formation. Secular scientists say this layer was laid down 12 to 15 million years ago. But what isn't admitted too often is that this layer contains diatoms. Diatoms are teeny, one-celled plants found in oceans. Secular scientists have a tough time coming up with a reasonable explanation for how this layer formed. But the flood is a perfect model to explain how it formed, because it involved seas where algae lived and also involved catastrophic deposition.
In addition, the top of the Mescal Formation is very smooth, so there was little or no erosion between the strata before the next layers were laid down. If millions of years had passed, there should be some erosion, but it just isn't there. As you go throughout the John Day fossil beds, there are many signs referring to the mammal fossils. In fact, this area is considered one of the largest beds for finding mammal fossils in the world.
Many of these mammals are unusual because we don't see them today. Yet, most are related to modern living mammals. A few are extinct and not related to any living mammals. There are several cat-like carnivores, over a dozen different members of the dog family, horses, several different rhinoceroses, and a number of different camels. The Visitor Center and published materials will say that these animal fossils had evolved from common ancestors. Yet, most of these mammals fit into the family categories of living mammals.
The secular idea of evolution says that the ancestors of modern animals were simpler and modern animals are more complex.
If true, we should see a chain of animal fossils connecting these links. Yet, when we look back through the fossil layers, the earlier mammals are just as complex. Evidence of evolution from simpler animals is lacking. Of course, we expect this, since each kind of animal was made on creation days 5 and 6, with intricate design from an intricate designer, God.
Here at Goose Rock, a conglomerate layer has been exposed. Several different rock types intermix here, indicating a water deposit.
Some of the pebbles and gravel in Goose Rock are thought by secular scientists to have come from the Aldrich Mountains, 40 miles to the south, because the wash rock is the same at both locations.
But there may be another source of these rocks, much farther away.
It's true, these exotic rounded cobbles and boulders are found on the south side of the Aldrich Mountains, but also in the Ochako Mountains west of here. The Aldrich Mountains may not be the source of these rocks, but just a depositing point for a much larger transport of stones. A large concentration of these same type rocks came from the Rockies several hundred miles away.
Secular scientists have a very challenging time trying to explain how this could have happened. But as creationists, it isn't very hard when we start from the Bible. Massive amounts of water, such as during a global flood, would have been required to move this rock so great a distance. The John Day fossil beds are a testament to the quick deposition, volcanic activity, and erosion of the earth during the year-long flood, as described in the book of Genesis.
Researchers can recognize that the evidence is a good confirmation of the catastrophic processes that formed these layers. The lack of erosion between layers, the massive erosion, and no evolutionary links in the fossils are all evidence for the biblical record being true. Here at the monument, evolution and long ages are presented as fact on the signs and at the visitor center. But the arguments just don't match up with the evidence.
What we see here reminds us that there was a judgment for man's rebellion against God, as recorded in the Bible.
All of the people and animals on the land were destroyed, except for one righteous man, his family, and all land-dwelling animals on the ark.
Because of his holiness and justice, God promises a coming judgment for man's continued rebellion after the flood, and this time a judgment by fire.
Yet, God in His love and mercy has provided a way of escape through repentance of sin and faith in His Son, Jesus Christ. By His death on the cross, Jesus took the punishment for your rebellion.
To be saved, you must repent of your sin and rebellion and turn your heart towards Him in faith.
We don't know the day when this next judgment is coming. So turn to God today, before it's too late. Come visit this amazing landscape and see the evidence of catastrophic processes during and after the global flood.
That's all for now. Remember, science, it's awesome.